So my name's Ryan. I'm a software developer. I like to make games. And over the past year or so, I've sort of been trying to learn a little bit more about the marketing and sort of business side of game development. I've talked to a lot of people around PIGSquad, and everyone's really great at a lot of stuff, but that seems to be one of the areas where I meet the fewest people that can offer advice on that. So over the past year, I've sort of just been poking around and trying to learn a little bit more about how that works. And then this presentation is sort of an invitation for you to sort of poke your toes into those waters and kind of see if there's something in there that works for you. Cool, so the very first thing that I've kind of found as I've delved into this is that there's a lot of people on the internet that tell you that you have to do exactly this one thing or you'll fail miserably and die. Don't believe them. Also, don't necessarily listen to everything I say like faithfully, right? The whole point of this is that none of this seems to be super like repeatable word by word. It's going to kind of vary from what works for you. We're all very different people, and we're all going to kind of find what fits into our own strides better. So one of the big messages of this talk is sort of figuring out what form of sharing works for you. And so the first thing we kind of could start with to dive into this is to figure out what mediums you're sort of already capable of creating in, right? You want to keep the barrier to entry as low as possible, right? You probably already know how to write, you like to take pictures, you like to take screenshots of your projects, maybe you want to try live streaming, record a podcast, whatever it is, just start with something that's familiar with you, that you're familiar with, right? Because the goal here is just to get started, right? And then there's a big tendency to kind of worry about like, when is the optimal like social media post on the Reddit for this one time of day or whatever it is. And you can get into that, but the biggest thing is just starting because you're gonna be wrong half the time. And the sooner you can start, the sooner you can start figuring out what works and what doesn't. So once you've kind of figured out what sort of thing you already know how to do, you wanna kind of find a schedule that works for you. That's the biggest thing that's helped me. Because there's this big tendency of like, oh, new year, new me, I'm gonna engage in social media this year and I'm gonna post 16 times the first week of January and then not again until June. And then that often is really sad. So what I find works a lot better is instead of thinking about your plan when you're in that optimistic stage, kind of think about you when you're rolling around in bed and you ate leftover pizza last night and you don't feel like getting up, right? Like how often is that person going to want to actually create this content? And then sort of based off that, say like, I'll tweet once a week. Then what you can do is when you're feeling great and you write those 16 tweets, instead of tweeting them all right then, save them and post them once every week. And then hopefully you'll find a good rhythm where you can sort of work when you're working best, right? And then share when it's better to share. Because consistency is sort of a thing that does really well for sharing on a lot of social networks, right? Because your audience sort of gets to come to depend on like, oh, here's the tweet, like, or here's the next newsletter, or here's the blog post. And they can sort of come to you reliably back and forth on that topic. So scheduling is super helpful. And then the biggest thing about this too is that none of this is gonna work the first time. You're gonna try something and it's gonna fail miserably, or you'll try something else and then it'll be wildly successful for some reason that you have no idea why, right? And you just want to make sure that you're going to keep changing these sorts of things. Because there's a quote that somebody has that's along the lines of like, what got you here won't get you there. And I think that that's kind of the thing you want to hold inside of you, right? Is that you need to keep changing and you need to keep iterating and just keep trying new stuff. And that really takes the stakes off of one thing that fails because you still have another dozen things ready to try. So find something you already know how to do, figure out a way to do it, reliably, and then just keep trying new stuff. And then, here's a slightly off-kilter slide, but I wanted to share a few of the things that I've noticed over the past year while I was experimenting. The biggest thing is that one data point isn't a trend. When you accidentally post this random thing that you have no idea why went viral, and then you just try to post this same random meme 1,000 more times, odds are it was only really going to work the first time. And you can't kind of take that into the context of, oh, I should do this every time. On the flip side, if you accidentally post in the middle of the Super Bowl or something, or whatever that is, and then it bombs, you would go out thinking you had terrible content when really you just had poor timing. And then the things listed next are just sort of a few bigger trends that I've noticed while sharing. There's sort of this shiny object syndrome. So the first time you post like this great project you've been working on for a long time, you'll get this big burst of like, oh wow, like 500 people favorited my tweet or whatever. That's never happened. Like 30 people. 30 people favorited my tweet. Wow, this is amazing, right? And then I'm like, okay, this next tweet is also gonna get 30, and then it gets like 20, and then the next one's like 10, and then there's 5, or whatever it is, right? People, because you have this sort of network, right? And once everyone's kind of seen it, if you post the same type of content over and over again, it's gonna be received less and less well. Another thing that I've noticed now that I've done it for a year is that there's sort of seasonal cycles when people seem to engage with social media a lot more or less. Particularly like last winter, I noticed there were lots fewer like favorites and interactions and things on stuff I posted. And then once it came around and everyone made their New Year's resolution to engage and network and everything started skyrocketing again. So it's important to sort of look for these longer term trends and not necessarily ascribe everything to what you're producing, because there's about a million other things that could cause something to do well or poorly. And if you can kind of not feel terrible about yourself because of that, that's really the goal. And then obviously fads are a thing to watch out for. The hot meme format is probably not going to be very hot next week, so don't just post that meme. Yeah, so that's a few trends that I noticed. So that was sort of the core pitch from me to you, right? Figure out the content you want, or figure out the content you can already make, post it consistently, and then keep experimenting. Along my journey last year, though, I sort of had a bunch of other random things I noticed that I thought could be helpful to share, so I'm going to go over some of those now. So this one is about polishing. There's a tendency, like when I've worked on projects in the past that I keep on my own, to kind of push off the little tweaks that are like maybe make this thing slide a little smoother or add some sparkle effects here. And you kind of have this tendency to push those off to the end and keep working on main features. But one of the downsides of social media is that people can't tell if something like plays well or if something like, or you're not standing there over their shoulder to sort of say like, oh, don't worry, I'm gonna fill that in later, it's gonna be great. They just take it on its merit, right? So you kind of have to take some of the polishing stuff you might push off and do it a little earlier. People aren't going to respond as well in a GIF or a video to just little squares dancing around until you have like character sprites. And there's the extra benefit here too is that while you're working on this game and you can kind of see it come to life sooner rather than later, you'll actually get some motivation to keep working on your project too. So polish is good. On the flip side though, because everything is fake on social media, you can kind of take that into your own advantage too. It doesn't actually have to work, it just has to look like it works. This is where stuff like, maybe you've had that bug that you can't figure out what's causing it and you like go right and then left and then the whole game crashes. We'll just go right and don't go left and then your GIF will look amazing and everyone will think it's cool, right? You can hide a lot of stuff like that, do it all the time, and it's super helpful. And you still get to share content like this. Like you can still make a new level even though, as long as you only go right. And then you can also do stuff where you just sort of lay out assets in Microsoft Paint or whatever it is. And this is great because you can kind of share stuff in a half-finished state, but present it as if it's working and sort of gauge people's responses. So a thing I find helpful is to sort of mock out a level design and sort of post that and pretend like it's working and it's already there and just see if people like, are they responding to this? Maybe people hate it and now you've saved yourself a bunch of time and you don't have to go delete all of the hard work you already did because it was fake. So there's good and bad sides about the fact that social media is a little superficial. Another great thing that I think is, it's really easy to get this extra mile out of social media is to sort of just actually engage with people on social media. When I scroll through Reddit or Twitter or whatever, the tendency to just kind of hit an upvote, hit a like, and then close out or scroll to the next thing is really easy. That's what they're designed to do. They want to keep you scrolling, right? But what can go a long way is sort of like when you look at this cool art this person posted and you're like, wow, that's awesome. Just like click the text box and then like type, wow, this is awesome at this person. Because if you've ever gotten a nice compliment from a random stranger on the internet, it feels great. And it costs you like almost no effort whatsoever. And you're probably already thinking it because you're liking this thing. But because it happens so rarely, people actually respond pretty positively to that. And this can kind of lead to you can meet a lot of new people that you maybe never would meet before. You can kind of say like, oh wow, that's really cool, how'd you do it? And maybe it'll start a conversation, and maybe it won't. But the worst case scenario, you made someone else's day better, so just give it a shot. And then this like I was saying before, a lot of social media apps are kind of designed to sort of keep you scrolling for eternity and kind of suck the life out of you. And there's a lot of tools that you can use outside of social media to kind of get a little more out of it. One of these categories of tools are schedulers. So there's these apps like TweetDeck and Buffer that let you write your tweets or your social media posts whenever you're feeling like it, and then instead of posting immediately, you can say, post this 3 days from now at 9 a.m. And it really lets you separate like when you work best from when is best to share. And you can kind of set reminders for yourself and say, hey, I said I'm going to post once every week. Now I just schedule that for the next week. I schedule that for 2 weeks out. And it really separates like when you're feeling like working from when you need to share what you're working on. And then there's also a lot of great recording and editing tools. Like there's free ones like OBS, and there's a lot of different like screen to GIF and a lot of other capturing tools that are a little better than whatever's built into your operating system. And most of them are free, or like $5 or whatever, so it's really worth checking those out. I've listed a bunch of these tools on the link in the bottom corner of the screen there. So if you're feeling like checking out what some of those tools are, check out that URL. And then, yeah, just the final closing thing here is sort of, it takes time. It's very hard to bank on just randomly going viral and then having that solve all of your problems. But what you can sort of bank on is this slow, steady progress, right? If you keep doing it consistently and you keep trying new things, like statistically, you're going to hit on something that works, right? And as long as you just keep that iteration up and you keep trying new stuff, eventually you'll start making slower and slower progress, or not slower and slower progress, faster, faster progress. You will slowly make faster, faster progress as you go. So yeah, that's sort of the pitch. Anyone have any questions?
Is this advice from you as a solo developer, or are you working with a couple of teammates to collaborate on some of this stuff?
So primarily over the past few months, I've been doing this solo. And that's part of what I think is super helpful about the schedule. You asked if I was working solo or with other teammates. I'm repeating the question for YouTube. That's why I find the schedule super helpful though, is because it does allow me to kind of work when I want to and schedule it for later, but also having those small incremental milestones keeps me, when I'm on my own, focused on actually delivering like stuff that can be seen or felt or touched or played with or whatever. And so I find it really helpful as a motivational tool as well, because the flip side too is that tweeting twice a week, if you miss one tweet, it's not the end of the world. It's very low stakes, but it also kind of keeps that incremental progress like we were talking about. Any other questions?
Can you tell me or us a little bit about the project that you're developing, and then also maybe give an example of something that you've shown on, say, Twitter,
Mm-hmm.
for that project that you got a positive response to versus maybe something that doesn't work as well?
Yeah, so the question was what is the project that I'm working on, and then maybe an example, something I've shared on Twitter that worked and something that didn't work. So the project I'm working on is called Wildfire. It's a game where you kind of save houses from burning down by solving like tile swapping puzzles. And that's on my Twitter, which is in the bottom right corner of the screen up here. And then for content that's worked and hasn't worked, it's been very variable. Early on, I would do a lot more static screenshots and kind of a lot of kind of couching stuff in text. So there's this tendency for me to write a lot of stuff and be like, hey, this is all work in progress. This isn't quite finished yet. And sort of hitting myself when I'm down before anyone's had a chance to actually look at it. And those sorts of posts performed less well. And stuff that I've noticed has worked a lot better has been sort of recording new levels, new mechanics in sort of a GIF format. I've found those get a lot more interaction. There's a lot more interesting stuff for people to look at. And then just also keeping things succinct and sort of saying like, working on this new level, what do you all think? And kind of inviting people to engage, I've found gets a lot more comments. I've found people to be like weirdly helpful for no reason. Like people are just like, oh, they asked a question, I'll engage, like let me respond. So I think those couple things, sort of the action-y gift to kind of catch your attention when you're scrolling, and then sort of the invitation for other people to engage have all been pretty helpful for me. Any other questions? I have 2 hands. I don't know who's first. What do you?
What are you using in your game?
Yeah, so I'm using, or sorry, the question was what am I using to make my game? I'm using a tool called Phaser. It's a web development framework because I do web development by day. So I do web game development by night. So it kind of works out. And then, what was your question?
We were talking about seasonal engagement in social media.
Yeah.
When do you feel was the best time / when was the worst time over the course of the year?
Yeah, so that's definitely really hard to nail down because I haven't done, or sorry, the question was what are the seasonal times that I've noticed that are particularly good or bad to post? It's really a thing that I wasn't aware existed until this year started, because I started in January last year and went all the way through last year and just thought that everything I was doing was working worse and worse. So until I came around to January and I was like, oh, wait a minute, everything's doing really well again. And so I guess what I would say is like, it seems like the beginning of the year through the summer until everyone starts getting bogged down in like, because there's Thanksgiving, there's Christmas, there's a lot of like things for people to engage with, like holiday-wise and just generally with their own stuff that people I think are less engaged on social media. So my hunch that is totally not backed by science whatsoever is that end of the year around holiday season is probably less likely to get interaction. I think another big piece of that too is there's a lot of like AAA and large scale like Hollywood blockbuster stuff that happens at that time. So there's a lot more to compete with too. So I think probably earlier on in the year, and then it seemed to kind of trail off as the year progressed. So, any other questions? All right, thank you.